Hi, guys, and good evening. My name is Elijah Lee, and I am the founder of Soul Magazine. And we are bringing you tonight the state of Black queer culture. So we have three amazing people that are going to be, I'll talk about a little bit later, that will be on the panel with us tonight. But first and foremost, I want to thank you guys for coming out. Last week we had an interesting conversation about finance as well. And this week we're talking about mental health. It's something that is very important to us as people of color and also as people that identify from the LGBT community. So, first, I want to thank our sponsors, our co sponsors for the event. So, we have the Center and MOBI, which is Mobilizing Our Brother Initiative. So, I'll read a quick little blurb about them. So, MOBI curates free social connectivity events for queer people of color to see their holistic self. And the center is a cornerstone of the LGBT community in New York City. Each year, more than 400 community groups come to support and make connections, find support systems, and take advantage of the many resources that are available. So we'll start off with our quick introductions and tell you about the lovely people that we have today with us. Just one second. All right, so I'm going to start with Brittany Andrews. And just make sure you guys can hear me. So, Brittany Andrews' pronouns are they and them. And after graduation from Prairie View A&M University, Brittany D. Andrews jumped into the telephone booth to shed the cape, also known as a cap and gown, for a hipster version of business casual, becoming a queer counselor intern based in Houston, Texas. Brittany has utilized an artistic medium of language and an eclectic approach to wellness to sculpt their role as creative director of the Kid Org, a community initiative. They have produced creative workshops in collaboration with Covenant House, California, Covenant House, Texas, and Harris County Juvenile Probation Department. The Kid has a mission to push the state of change forward in conversations about mental health, community engagement, criminal justice reform, and the LGBT community. Recently named as the Idea Fund Round 12 grantee, Brittany is producing the session LGBTQ Mental Health, featuring queer people of color as a short film. As a short film composed of private, unscripted dialogues with queer people of color, reflecting on their unique identities within their cultures, the LGBT community, and the challenges faced in expression of their gender, sexuality, and development of affirming and inclusive relationships. Next, we have Dr. Lassiter. And Dr. Lassiter, Matthias Lassiter, is a polymath who utilizes psychology, writing, and dance to help others heal and thrive. His role includes licensed clinical psychologist, professor, author, public speaker, and choreographer. As a public intellectual, Dr. Lassiter has been featured on television, radio, podcasts, and print such as PBS and SiriusXM. Dr. Lassiter is the award winning co editor of Black LGBT Health in the United States, the intersection of race, gender, and sexual orientation. This book received the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association Achievement Award. It is the first and only text to focus solely on Black LGBT Americans' holistic health. He is currently working with his first sole authored book that will explore contemporary issues of race and mental health in the United States. In addition, Dr. Lassiter has published numerous articles in academic journals and lay publications, presented his choreographic works and produced showcases in New York City, and provided psychological services to clients in medical centers across the country. Currently, Dr. Lassiter is an assistant professor of psychology at Muhlenberg College and a visiting assistant professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. And last but not least, we have Dr. Alfonso Sue, recently awarded Dr. Alfonso Ferguson. And Dr. Alfonso Ferguson is a Afro-Caribbean immigrant who hails from Jamaica as a culturally sensitive New York State licensed mental health counselor and psychotherapist. Alfonso prides himself on providing counseling services to underserved communities. He has earned his Master of Arts in Rehabilitation and Mental Health Counseling from the University of South Florida. He is currently pursuing a doctorate of physiology and counseling at Montclair State University. Alfonso has gained a variety of experiences, individual and family counseling services to those who are experiencing psychosocial stressors, family issues, and mood disorders. He has a strong interest to work with individuals diagnosed with mood disorders, that is, major depressive disorders and generalized anxiety disorder. Alfonso, Alfonso's professional experience includes case management services at Grace Point in Tampa, Florida, preventive family counseling at SEO Family Services in Brooklyn, and outpatient mental health clinical clinician at the Institute for Family Health Center for Counseling in Harlem. Alfonso currently owns and operates his own psychotherapy private practice located in New York, and provides consultation services to the Global Trauma Research Center located in Brooklyn. Lastly, Alfonso is currently an adjunct faculty member at Montclair State University. And here we go. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, good.
Good evening.
Good evening. So we'll start and jump right in. You guys have some amazing bios. I'm happy to have you guys here on today. Like, there's a lot of nice questions, and there was one quick thing I forgot to mention. Um, was that if you guys, I think as we go through, there are questions. I'm going to quickly kind of just jump back over before we begin. But if you guys have any questions that you guys want to ask, we're taking it at a site called Pigeonhole. So the site is pigeonhole.at, and the code to kind of engage and put questions in is A1C2. So that's pigeonhole.at, Apple Tom, and the password to put in questions is A1C2. So on that system, basically what you do is we'll upvote or downvote questions, and towards the end, we'll basically get to the ones that were top voted. But if you put those in now, we're taking questions until I think like 7:30 on that app, and just put the questions that you guys have, and we'll ask our audience. So let's dive right in. So uh, the first question I want to know is, how are we doing as a community when it comes to mental health? What do you guys think?
Mhm. I'll go first, I guess. As a community for uh, the Black culture and as a community for the LGBT culture, I think we have a long way to go. Starting with our culture for the African American community or the African American diaspora, we have to take a larger initiative in understanding the importance of mental health, and the importance of navigating our mental health in conjunction with our cultural background. So that means that faith still has a place It means that our professions still have a place. It means that our education still has a place. Our physical health has a place, but our mental health has to be at the head of the majority of all of those things. As an LGBT community, well, LGBTQ plus community, I think that we're doing a good job of including the conversation around mental health and the importance. And we might need to include the importance of connecting mental health to some of the disparities within our community and some of the disadvantages that we experience like constantly. More specifically, when we're talking about the murdering of trans Black women, the impact that has like within our community and the impact it has within like our ability to develop positive mental health and coping skills.
Awesome. I'll go next. I think Brittany touched on a large chunk of what I was thinking and feeling in the moment. But what I want to add is it's been evident that there are some steps being made, especially with the African American or the Black community as a whole. But I think, like Brittany said, we have such a far way to go or a long way to go. I think what I really appreciate that I'm seeing more in recent years are we're starting to have a conversation, the conversation on a larger scale. I just think of like places like Essence or BET who are being active participant or playing an active role in increasing mental health awareness. There are other platforms that aren't as big or as important. I take that back. They're very important, but aren't as big or not as notable that are also having the conversation. So it's exciting to see, but I still think that within a lot of our sub communities within the Black communities, there's still a conversation around privacy or not airing out family business to a stranger, if you will. And so I think there's this healthy paranoia or healthy fear around seeking mental health counseling because of not really understanding the ins and outs of the counseling profession, whether it's is my information going to get out, who's going to know, who are you going to share this information with, and what are you going to use this information for. And so I think, and on top of that, there's a healthy concern around, like, is my therapist share the same identities as I do? And will they understand and support me in the ways that I navigate the world? And it's really hard to tell, right? So I think we're starting to have a lot of these conversations. We're moving in the right direction, but as Brittany said, we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I would add to what my colleagues have just said. When I think about how we're doing in terms of mental health, I think about Black LGBT folks, LGBT LGBTQ plus folks, both as a large group, but also as a group with various intersections, various subgroups, subgroups within that group. And so when we're thinking about that, we know that statistically speaking, when it comes to mental health, Black LGBTQ plus folks actually have lower prevalence rates than white LGBTQ plus communities when it comes to mental health. However, when we're looking at compared to our Black heterosexual counterparts, we actually have higher rates. There is one area, though, where we do see higher prevalence rates of mental health problems among Black LGBTQ plus communities, and that is with suicide. So while we don't have higher rates, comparatively speaking, when it comes to anxiety and mood disorders or things like that, when it comes to suicide, those rates are pretty high. They're disproportionately high. So when we're talking about what mental health looks like in the Black LGBTQ plus community, we always need to be thinking intersectionally, and always need to be thinking like, are we talking about mainstream red-white culture? Or are we talking about comparing to other Black folks? When it comes to awareness of mental health, I think we're doing a better job than we have done in past decades, definitely. But I think there's a difference between awareness and education. Sure. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, you may have an Instagram account that puts up like these, these placards or whatnot, these graphics talking about a mental health or a motivational message. But that's not the same as actual qualified education or psychoeducation about mental health. And so I think we still have a long ways to go in terms of that sort of education. And that has to do with access. So I don't want us to think about scapegoating Black people for not going to therapy without also thinking about the ways in which the traditional therapeutic modes were not built for Black people, or Black LGBTQ people in particular, and how a lot of the work that we're doing is adaptation of Eurocentric therapeutic models for Black LGBTQ communities. And so if we're thinking about that, we can't really fault Black LGBTQ people for not really wanting to access those. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think it's on both sides. I think we need to do that education with qualified folks doing that education and not TI, you know? And we also need to also challenge the system itself to make it more welcoming and more culturally appropriate.
Sure.
None of this awareness is coming about, and a lot of the buzzword is self-care. That a lot of people are saying now. I'm doing this for self-care. So what does self-care really mean, and can self-care be toxic?
And so for me, and with work, I'm thinking of it not only with my support system, my community, my personal community, but also with my clients. For a lot of people, they've defined self-care, and I guess this is a definition that I subscribe to, is an act or a behavior that supports your emotional, mental, or physical, your holistic well-being, and in order for you to maintain yourself or your well-being, but also be able to shed when needed, if that makes any sense. To the second part, can self-care be toxic? I've definitely seen it used as a weapon, as a way to avoid certain conversations or certain behaviors, or a way as to be a victim. Right. And so in some cases, I've seen where friends and sometimes my clients are like, I'm not going to respond to that text because I'm taking care of myself and I'm setting these boundaries. And I think it's important to set the boundaries. Don't get me wrong. I think it's important to set the boundaries, but I also think sometimes people use it in a way where they don't allow opportunity for constructive feedback, or check in with themselves and opportunities for growth.
Yeah, I would say that self-care is definitely going to be individual to each person, right? What I find as something that is beneficial for me is not necessarily going to be beneficial for the next person and vice versa. And so I think self-care, though, the overarching goal for me of self-care is growth, right? So it's the self-care that you're doing going to allow for you to grow. And it doesn't necessarily mean doing something in the moment. It could be taking a step back. It could be taking a step out of the moment. But it doesn't ultimately lead to you being able to, in that moment where you step back, reflect, rejuvenate, and so that you can then move forward and grow eventually, right? So as far as self-care being toxic, again, with social media, a lot of times the ways in which I see self-care being toxic is that it can become performative. And so people like to publicize different sorts of or different types of self-care that they're doing and then put it all over social media. And then it puts pressure on other people. Well, my self-care doesn't look like that. Am I doing it the right way? So on and so forth. And so in that way, self-care can become the culture or the performance of self-care can become anxiety provoking in and of itself. So I think when self-care becomes performative, it becomes toxic.
I agree. Well, they said it. But I'll just kind of to wrap it up. I think self-care, again, it's how you nurture yourself, but also gives yourself the opportunity to grow. And that could be physically, emotionally, it could be socially, professionally, in all areas and aspects of your life. As far as it becoming toxic, yeah, it can be. It depends on how you're using it. And so being a steward of self-care would be practicing a lot of mindfulness in different areas of your life. And mindfulness means taking a moment to assess for what it is that you need, figure out, how you can best support yourself. and remembering that self-care is not an escape pod away from, the stressors of your life or the stressors of the world. It's not an immediate pill to make something go away. If you do yoga one time, it's not going to, make all of your anxiety go away. But it is a practice and a tool that we use. Yeah.
But I will make a plug for temporary escape, because sometimes temporary escape can be good. You want to get out of the situation, but I think we can't stay in the escape zone, if you will, right?
It's like an escape room. You got to get out. You still got to get out the room, but you can use it for a little while.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then the next question is, for those that are without access to therapy, what has been the most effective coping strategy? I know, Dr. Lasser, I know you had a book out kind of talking a little bit about this stuff. So do you want to kind of start first, like what you've seen in your process?
Yeah. So when we look at coping strategies, again, psychotherapy is a tool, right? And it's not the first thing. People were coping before psychotherapy, and people will be coping after psychotherapy. So psychotherapy is a tool. So even if we don't have access to psychotherapy, there are things that we can do to cope, whether that's reading. One of the first things I remember when I was going through my own process of coming to terms with my sexual orientation, I grew up very religious. So there was part of that for me too, is integrating those identities and navigating those identities. But reading affirming literature, for me, it was Elin Harris, but reading affirming literature was a coping tool, because what it allowed me to do was it allowed me to see a possibility model of who I could be in the future. So it was very helpful in that way. And so I would say any sort of thing that allows us to imagine ourselves beyond our current confines is a coping strategy. Mm-hmm. And we can do that within formal therapy, which can be very helpful, but we can also do that with reading. We can do that when engaging in affirming media. And we can also do that with supportive loved ones. There's lots of venues for that sort of thing.
I'll go next. A couple of things that I immediately thought of when reading the question. One being, I've noticed with a lot of my clients that, and friends and family members, we feel like we're working a lot more than we normally do. We're doing the same job, probably the same, or it feels like the same amount of hours, but it feels longer, it feels more exhausting. So one of the things I've been talking to some of my clients about is setting boundaries for yourself, really. Because I could totally see it, and we were talking about this before we started the call. I could totally see me personally. I wake up at 8 a.m. and I start working from 8, and I'll probably work till about 10. And if I were going to a physical place, going to work, I would probably be shutting off around 5 or 6, right? Or I'd probably really be starting my workday at 9 a.m. So I'm starting an hour early, and I'm going for an extra 3 hours. So and there's a lot more work to do, or it feels more taxing when you are having to be present or sit in front of a computer for a longer period of time and work that way. We don't have the comfort of commuting, if that makes any sense, right? The comfort of commuting and disassociating ourselves from our home so that we actually have a home to go home to, and we feel like we've left work at work. So really just setting boundaries around your time. Another thing that I immediately thought of is having AM and PM routines. Having a routine where you are like, this is the time I'm starting and this is how I'm going to get ready. Because like I've said before, we don't have that physical commute anymore where we have an AM routine of I got to get out of the house by this time in order to be at work by this time to start my day. So what does your startup look like and what does your wind down look like? So those are things to be mindful of, because I could totally see not only with my own self and a lot of my clients, like you can just work all day and you're working 80-hour work weeks and not even realizing you're working 80-hour work weeks.
All right. Yeah. Just to piggyback, same. The best coping strategy that you can ever have is healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries save you from not just like physical harm, but emotional damage, financial damage, Totally. But in setting the schedule, be intentional about your schedule that you're setting, and be realistic too. That separation from work and home, like Alfonso was talking about, is very important. And that commute, even though you might really, really, really hate the rush hour traffic trying to get to work or get home, is actually that period of time where you get to kind of like shed work, maybe on the way home. Like you'll talk to your significant other about like, let me tell you about what these people did at work today. And by the time you get home, you're over it. And it's like, I'm safe and I'm in my happy place. But to go from, working at, your desk area, which is like probably right next to where you guys probably have dinner, or if you're working in your living room, you're redefining those spaces in your home. So one thing that we talked about with my coworkers and also with my clients is defining your work area, if possible, to try to only do work maybe in a certain place, and then to keep the rest of your home in its regular routine and manner. Try to incorporate taking like physical breaks from work. I know that when you're working, usually, like you can work nonstop. I didn't eat lunch and I just kept going, but we're at home now. So take a lunch and really get up and walk away from the computer, close it if you can, walk outside and get some air, get some sun, come back in and, finish the rest of your day. Try to use like aromatherapy if possible, light some candles, make the work area be really nice if we have to sit at the computer all day. But those things work. And then also trying to incorporate like positive things like podcasts, reading, journaling, things like that can also help right now.
Yeah, and I would add to that, scheduling time when we're not scheduled. Again, I think this gets to one of the other questions on your list, Elijah, about the pressures of being busy. Again, I have to talk to folks and I talk to clients. I'm just like, the way they talk is like, social distancing is happening. They're in quarantine in their house and they're doing this and that and that. I'm like, do you plan on starting 5 businesses while you're in quarantine?
5 new LLCs.
By the time we're out of court, I'm like, it's okay to not be. If all you do all day is survive, that's okay.
Yeah, that's important. I think to have that.
Yeah. So I think also, so we're talking about. I totally agree about the schedule. That structure, because that's what it is. It's a frame. It's a structure. Can definitely be helpful for people, especially people that struggle with anxiety. But I also think structuring time to just be and to not have anything where you're going back and forth can also be helpful. But that's both in and out of the pandemic. So that's true either way. And I did want to mention spirituality because your question was about effective coping strategies.
Sure.
Spirituality is very important, especially for Black people, and I would say for Black LGBTQ plus people too. My personal research program looks at the ways in which spirituality influences health outcomes for Black sexual minority men. And what I found is that lots of Black sexual minority people are reared in religious and spiritual environments. And that doesn't just go away just because we, come to accept our identities as LGBTQ plus people. And a lot of us are redefining that spirituality in ways that serve us, that are affirmative. So I think that's also a big part of how we cope as well. So that spirituality is very important. Some of the work I've recently done looked at an Afrocentric spirituality that was connected to one's ancestors, that helped one cope with intersectional oppression. And it was also tied to the sense of being an infinite being. So not just someone where spirituality exists in the now, but it existed before this after this particular physical lifetime. And that sort of perspective can give people the feeling of empowerment. So I think spirituality is definitely a part of that effective coping strategy. I definitely put that on the list.
So I think before we switch, there actually is a nice community question, and I think the first part we kind of just did some general questions, and then we're gonna switch into a little more specific questions, especially about now that like these are new times where we're at home, we're either by ourselves or with loved ones. So this is one of the community questions. So for people who live alone and have few friends and family, how do you not overly depend on those friends and families for emotional labor when you feel extremely
Mm. So that kind of takes us back to the conversation about self-care. And tapping into what you need and being aware of the different aspects of your life. We kind of refer to it sometimes as like parts work. What are all the parts of you that make up you? I like to do it with Play-Doh with my clients. Call me a big kid, but that's what we do. Okay. To kind of really ask yourself, like, what am I or who am I? You know, like what makes me tick? And if I can kind of like dial into the fact that, yeah, you know what, waking up in the morning and doing like a little bit of yoga and stretching really moves my day, right? Then I can tap further into that. What are some other principles maybe that come with yoga, meditation, mindfulness, relaxation, and things like that, that can actually bring me a sense of, you know, calmness, nurturing, and it can actually nurture maybe that emotional side of me also. So being one with yourself and understanding you. Right now, with the sense of isolation, the best place to kind of put your thoughts sometimes is a journal. And when we're living by ourselves, we don't have to worry about someone finding our journal because I live by myself. But in journaling, I always try to be transparent. You can still have a little bit of that residual fear kind of built up, like, oh, if I write this down, like it's real because I wrote it. But kind of challenging yourself to become familiar with you as a person and not just you as like a third party citizen within yourself, but realizing that these are my thoughts, these are my emotions, and being able to sit and commune with yourself is a good thing to do.
And we'll kind of switch in because Corona is here for now, but a lot of the next questions are concerning COVID 19. So the first question
Hello?
is,
Can you all hear me?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what you said. Because when loneliness and that sense of isolation is something that can be very difficult to sit with. And it's definitely something that you want to try to find some sort of remedy for. And sometimes it's easier said than done. And again, even outside of the COVID-19, it's something that depending on your location, you may not have community, right? But I like your idea about journaling because I think part of the sense of isolation is that people, I would say a lot of people aren't used to you talking, right?
Yeah.
Sharing.
What had happened was, what's the question again? I mean, I felt like I said something really interesting, but I don't remember what I said. Um,
The question was around, this was a community question. And the question was for those of us living alone and have few friends and family, how do we not overly depend on those friends and families for emotional labor when we feel extremely isolated?
I think some of what we were talking about when we got disconnected was just this idea of this experience, this pandemic has given a lot of people an opportunity to learn themselves or get to know themselves because, you know, especially in a place like New York or wherever you are in big cities, there's so many things happening, you know, whether it's work, whether it's friends, whether it's family, there's always something to do. So we don't really get an opportunity to spend time with ourselves. And now that we're being forced to spend time with ourselves, a lot of people are having those moments where they have to check in with who they are. Do they like who they are or who they're becoming? Really check into some of the traumatic experiences that they may have had that they've swept under the rug and kept it pushing because, especially as people of color, we have to keep it pushing. Like society tells us we don't get to take time for ourselves and have our experiences because bills got to be paid and no one's going to pay your bills. We don't have family and friends to fall back on to support us in we don't have time to like crawl up in a ball if that makes any sense and spend a couple of days or a couple of weeks figuring out what's been happening with us. So I think this mandated social isolation or staying at home has really afforded a lot of us an opportunity to check in with ourselves and who we are and where we're going.
And now on to like the COVID question. So, um, I think for those of us who work from home, what are some of the ways to maintain balance for the new demands from our bosses who have become micromanagers, as you might say?
We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier with the maintaining like the schedule and the boundaries. I think just speaking candidly, I think as we're all working from home, we're a little concerned that, ooh, they're going to figure out like I'm not doing something, or, you kind of figure out the schedule during the day and it's like, nobody's going to email me right now. I'm about to catch this episode of Ozark. Um, and that's well within your means. If you can make it work, finish season 3, it's good. But trying to maintain like healthy boundaries with your supervisors, with your coworkers, or just work in general, but also like with family too. Another thing with COVID is not just work related, but if you have children, you are now a teacher. And I don't know, but I didn't go to school to do that. So, I can only imagine the stress that comes along with that. Also, like some people are taking care of like elderly parents. Everybody's family dynamic is different. So I think that, a level of transparency and conversation with your supervisor about some of the new strains that you have working from home could work out. But also, if you're not comfortable with making those type of conversations, then just trying to maintain a healthy schedule. Like I kind of talked about earlier, make the workplace cute, light you a candle. This is my little workstation table, close the computer when work is over with and try to maintain the separation between work, home, and family, profession, trying to maintain social interaction too. All of those things kind of help you keep that work-life balance. Just because we're working and living in the same space right now doesn't mean that everything has to congeal together. We can still keep things, nicely separated and nurture our relationships with our friends, our relationships with our work, our relationship with ourselves, because we're all we got for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That would be my suggestion.
Absolutely.
I think something that COVID-19 is highlighting are all the areas for improvement that we had before COVID-19, and they're kind of exacerbated now because boundaries is something we needed before. If you have a boss that's micromanaging you, that was an issue before, right? Like you needed to probably say something a while ago, and so now it's like we're in this social isolation, and people are supposed to be right there at the computer. But like you said, Brittany, I'm just going to be candid, like. Sometimes don't answer the email. And then, sometimes I make my colleagues send me an email. I'm like, if it's pouring, they'll send it again. So I got other stuff to do. So it is what it is. And the other thing is, I'm not encouraging people to lie or not be direct. Of course, being direct is very important and the best policy. But they don't know what your internet situation is like at home. So whatever you need to do to prioritize your mental health, again, not escape your responsibilities, not to slack off. But if you feel yourself becoming overburdened, do what you need to do to get your balance and then re-engage. And setting those boundaries are very important, just to echo what you both have been saying. But I just want to highlight that a lot of the things we're talking about now are things that we should have been doing and we should do after social isolation is over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, Brittany, you brought up a really good point that I've been sitting with around people who have other responsibilities at home and having to do those like home responsibilities, whether it's taking care of an elderly family member and or having children in the home who are also going to school. So you've become the teacher, the mother, the employee, the housekeeper. You're everything. You are everything. So I think of specifically. I have a client who wears many hats in her home, and she had to have a conversation with her boss around like expectations around time frames, because she works in a role where at any given time, the boss may wake up and say, 2 o'clock in the morning, hey, could you send this email? Or I need you to do this first thing in the morning, or I need you to do this right now. So being able to set boundaries with your employer, and that could look like having a candid conversation from the get-go. Like, hey, now that I'm working from home, this is what I'm up against, and these are the hours that I can commit. These are my 8 hours every day. And I recognize that not everyone has that privilege, but I'm curious for what some people, what that conversation could look like, just so you and your employer are on the same page. And I think also, Brittany, and this is something that I've also been talking with a lot of my clients around, is creating a workstation for yourself. Like, I have folks who take their work calls and work all day in bed. So so when it's time to shut off and set boundaries for yourself, like, you haven't left the room in 24 hours. You may have went to the bathroom, but that's about it. Or you're eating in the bed, you're working in the bed, you're taking calls in the bed. So really creating a workstation for yourself, getting on Amazon, buying you a little $50 desk or something, finding a corner to put it so that you get dressed up and you go to work.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's down the hall, you're going to work.
Yeah.
I also think in part that getting dressed up for work is a part of it as well. It puts you, at least it puts me in that mind frame that I'm somewhere else, or I'm going somewhere else. I'm going to work. So it's not I'm in my pajamas. And once this call ends, I'm back to reality. You haven't really left. You haven't gone anywhere. You haven't mentally transitioned anywhere else.
Right.
And I wanted to shift the conversation quickly, but I think we talked about, and we kind of talked to some already, but like, can you talk about the pressure of being busy during this time when some of us actually should be doing the exact opposite?
That's that performance anxiety kind of thing. Jonathan brought this up earlier, like when self-care can become toxic. We want it to look like what everyone else is doing. And while we love social media, and that's how we were all able to kind of meet each other, it can work well and it can work bad. There was a meme that went out and it kind of struck me to my soul. And I think I shared it with some of my like friends and colleagues too, but it was saying, if you come out of this COVID-19 session and you haven't learned a new skill, started a new business, and I can't remember what the third thing was, but you didn't lack like skill, talent, and ability. You lack self-discipline, and I was just like, oh, and I really did it. I remember vividly, like that's how deeply it impacted me, because it was like right when all of this stuff had started. And I said, oh, let me hurry up and download some books, child, and like
Read something.
figure it out. Let me figure it out. Okay. Made me a little task list. And then I kind of worked through that for like a few days. And by the time I got to day 3, I had to check in with self and say, this is not how we operate here. And that goes back to, communing with self. And I was asking myself, like, why do I feel so worked up? Like, what's going on? And I had all these task list spreadsheets, and you can ask my girlfriend, like, I'm a whiz when it comes to Excel. Everything is color coded. It's moving between spreadsheets. And I'm just like, what's going on? Nah. It caused me to kind of look back in the things that I am doing and be appreciative of the successes that I've made so far. And while it did motivate me to think about some things that I do want to accomplish, I had to kind of put those things into a better perspective on how I wanted to get that done. So I kind of went back through, all my little spreadsheets and tabs and was like, okay, this is important. This could get done, during this little period of isolation. Absolutely. I can try to work out more consistently, because I really don't have an excuse now. I don't have to go to the gym. It's right here. So I can do that. And that worked well for me, but that might not be the same thing for somebody else. It really might mean that I need time to be by myself because I'm working and I'm being a teacher and I have to answer all these emails and all these phone calls. Is overwhelming to me. Maybe you don't usually work with technology for your job, but you had to switch over to doing that. It is okay to take a break. It's okay to take a nap. Like, it's perfectly fine. And in actuality, we would suggest that you do that to take care of yourself if that's what your body is asking you to do.
Absolutely. We're reading this question. One of the immediate things I think about is this culture around social media and how like the standard is being made by people, and so the standard is being made by our peers, right, in ways in which we're often putting our best selves on the social media, where we're curating the life that we want you to believe that we have, which can sometimes be become a pressure issue or become pressure for those who are looking and like, oh, so and so is traveling, so and so is doing that, so and so is so busy. Like, look at them, they're getting it during this time. What am I doing, right? And I think and it creates this one. It motivates us to some extent, right? So I appreciate that of it, but it creates this idea of like, I'm not doing enough, I'm not enough, or I'm not worthy, or compared to everybody else, they out here getting it. What am I doing? What is wrong with me? And it's really important for us to not only check in with ourselves on what we want, not what we want in comparison to what they have. And I think really being focused and clear on what your goals are for yourself, because we don't know what's behind those computer screens. We don't know what's behind those phone screens, where there are people who are, I have friends who are big in social media, and they have content that they hold on to for months. And you would think that they're out here on vacation every week, but they went on vacation 6 months ago, sis.
Surprise.
Right. Catching flights.
Uh-uh.
So, but they've created or curated this image of themselves, and that's kind of what's happening right now as well. You see people who are doing their daily workouts and their daily yoga, and people who are started this business. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm working out, I'm sleeping well, my skin is flawless, all these things, and we don't know if those pictures are from 6 months ago. But what they're putting out to the public right now is, I'm living my best life during quarantine. And what y'all doing?
It's an underlying culture that focuses our self-worth on what we produce.
Sure.
I think it's a cultural issue. We live in an individualistic society, a materialistic society that is obsessed with what we produce. And our real value is who we are, how we treat others, who we are in relationship with others. And social media, again, exacerbates that, because it's all about, look at what I did, look at what I'm doing. But we don't know what type of people those folks are. A lot of them are curating a life and presenting something false to the world. So do you want to be that sort of person that presents something false to the world just because it looks good? So there needs to be this shift from doing to being. And that's something I work with my clients about, is how do we move from a focus on doing to a focus on being. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have goals and we don't work on things to achieve, but that's not the point. The doing is not the point. The being is the point. And while being, of course, things will happen, but the being is the point. And so it needs to be a paradigm shift. It needs to be a paradigm shift, because that's what underlies all of this. I need to be busy. I need to be busy. It's fake. 99% of it is fake. Let it go. I've unfollowed people that I've seen that post. I'm just like, nah, I'm not doing this. Like, how you on vacation do you have a regular job? It's just like, I'm not doing this,
It's too much pressure. It's too much pressure.
And I have friends that do that too. They were like, oh, here I am, living my best life. I'm like, I just got off the phone with you and you were depressed. What are you talking about? Now you got this picture up. Like, no, it's fake. Let it go.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you brought up the concept between doing and being. There's a parenting tool called Nurturing Parenting. And one of the activities that we do in that program with trying to educate parents on how to have a more nurturing relationship with their children, it's an actual lesson that's called doing versus being. And that level of productivity is kind of produced in our formative years, when you're going to school and it's like, look at my project. I got an A, versus having a conversation with your kid and saying, I really saw that you were interested in said project. I really appreciated the way that, you comforted your friend when they fell down at the playground or whatever. Or if they lost the game, there's a little video of a young man putting his teammate's chin up. They had lost the game. and, you know, they were shaking hands and he walked past him and, you know, he dapped him up, but he put his chin up because the young man had his head down. If that was my child, you go back to them and you say, you know, I'm proud of you for the way that you were there for your friend, to remind them of who they were and that you guys played an excellent game on today. We're not even going to talk about the loss. It doesn't matter that you lost the game. We're talking about you being a good person, not doing well at basketball, you know.
And I think that perspective is so important, especially for Black LGBTQ plus people, because oftentimes our value is demeaned. Like, we're taught that we don't have value, or we need to be a certain way, or we need to be a certain type of Black LGBTQ plus person, and we need to fit a certain image. And so it's such a focus on doing something right. And it's really, but the real importance, again, is we have intrinsic self-worth. We have worth because we exist. We did nothing. I tell my clients, I tell my friends, I say, if all you did was wake up and you treated yourself well, you treated others well,
that's enough.
That's enough. That's enough. It reminds me of Baldwin when he talks about how your crown's already been paid for, you know? Like, we already have our worth. We don't need to do nothing. We wake up and we went to sleep. We're still valuable people. And we don't need to fit a certain image of anything. And so I think the more that we can cultivate a way of being that is not focused on, again, being even if no one's around to see us being. That's another thing too, right? So the more we cultivate that, I think the healthier all of us will be. And then being by ourselves won't be so distressing.
Right. Because you're still good to yourself.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think because if I speak for myself, I think there was a time where I valued myself based on what I was doing, and then it became exhausted. I was broke, trying to create this facade, and then realizing that I think it's the being which gives me that state of mental calm and sanity, and like that empowered me versus saying, okay, like I don't have to keep like doing this or like buying this to kind of put up to say that I am this successful
yeah.
person and stuff like that. So, yeah. And a lot of the stuff like I got like from like therapy and other like self development courses. So I think one of the questions, kind of shifting gears, is how do you know, like, if you do have a therapist, how do you know you have a great one? Like, how should your sessions be going? Like, are there times like where what do you look out for when you're trying to see if you have a good therapist that you're with, if you're a match?
I think it varies.
A good therapist that you're with, if you're a match.
I think it varies. If I were to say what my clients, in my experience as a therapist, what they've found valuable is when we're vibing, when it feels organic. Not that it feels easy, but it feels good. There's this weird feeling that you can have in a session, and I think as a therapist you have that too. It's like we click, we hear, we see each other. And not to say that if it starts off rocky or if it feels like it's forced at first, that doesn't mean you can't have a great relationship. It's still very possible can develop into a great relationship. But I don't know. It's weird because you kind of know. You feel it. You feel good. They almost feel like friends.
I think, again, it's going to be different for everyone. For me, what a hallmark of a good therapist is someone that challenges you. Sure. And as a clinical psychologist, and I have friends who are trying to get, live their best life and get their mental health together. Some of them are going into therapy for the first time, or they're starting with new therapists. And I hear stories sometimes like, my therapist made me mad. And I said, well, what did they say? They told me the truth about myself, basically, right? And I feel like they're doing their job. Stick with it. Stick with it. Right. So a therapist that challenges you, sometimes we need coddling. Sometimes we need someone to hold our hands, but we can't stay there. Growth doesn't happen in that place per se. You know, we need someone that's going to be there, that's going to support us, that's going to hold our hand at times, but really challenge us, push us out of our comfort zone, because that's where the growth happens. And so it is about that vibe. It definitely is about that vibe. But it's also about the challenge. People that I say therapists that would make you feel uncomfortable, but you know deeply on a soulful, on a vibe level that they have your best interest at heart. That's what's really important.
Before you can identify if you have a good therapist or not, I would ask that you interview your therapist, and do some research about the individual first. That's how we're going to find out if we got a good therapist or not. People can market themselves to be a lot of things. And one thing that I've kind of come across recently is like the life coaching. Life coaches, a therapist can be a life coach. They can be a certified life coach. Okay. But a life coach that's not a licensed counselor, or they're not a psychologist, they're not trained in the mental health profession, they're not offering you mental health services, they're offering you life coaching services, which is great. But if you're looking for a mental health professional, let's make sure that we're with a licensed and credentialed individual first. Secondly, all therapists, most therapists, if they're not doing this, then that probably isn't the therapist for you. They're going to give you a free consultation. That's for us to kind of check in and do that little vibe check. You know, like, this weird. Let me come in here and sit down for a little while. You're not going to eat me. Okay, I feel cool. You feel cool. We can do this, right? And then we can come back for our original first session, you know, which will really be our second session, right? But during that consultation period, one thing that we struggle with in the African American community and the minority community is a power complex. When we enter into situations of healthcare and education, we always feel like, well, I don't want to challenge your authority, you know. But walking into this situation, absolutely, the licensed professional has a wealth of information about mental health services. They're here to help. But we also need to make sure that they can fully invest and help you through your journey. So having a therapist that is understanding of your lifestyle and asking them some questions about how they view your perspective of the world, or how they're going to assist you with navigating microaggressions or racism, or how your sexual identity impacts your lifestyle. All of those things are fair game questions. And what we don't want to happen is halfway through this therapeutic relationship, we find out that we're not on the same page when it comes to, you know, my sexual identity. We are not on the same page as I'm discovering my gender identity or gender expression, and you can't really keep up with me. Not to say that someone who is not a member of the LGBTQ plus community can't be your therapist, but it's imperative that you ask some questions before you start this relationship. While you're engaging in that relationship, then what both of them said is very important. You're going to feel a natural connection to this person. You're spending 45 minutes to 60 minutes with me one time a week. We're going to get to know each other pretty well, you know, so we should have a good relationship and a good rapport. And also, you should be okay with me challenging you to be better, right? And to discover some new things about yourself.
Should be back soon. Oh,
I would
all right.
add to that. I would add to that though, um, because you talked about power, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's an important part of the conversation, especially with Black LGBTQ plus communities and any marginalized community in general. We're used to being disempowered, and sometimes that can be replicated in the therapeutic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important that a good, for me, a good therapist is a therapist that recognizes what they bring to the room, but considers you the expert in your life. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I always tell my patients. I say, you know, I went to school for several years. I do the research. I teach the kids about psychology. However, you are the expert in your life. And so
Right.
we're in this together, you know. And so if someone is taking a perspective that's like, here's the answers, I'm going to fix you,
Mm-mm.
not going to be good,
Thank you.
right?
Not.
Probably not going to be good, right? It's also an opportunity to focus on you. And for some patients, they're used to fixing everyone else. And so a good therapist, again, my definition of good, a good therapist is going to challenge you to sit with the discomfort of focusing on you. because for that 45 or 60 minutes may be the only time you have to focus on you in the entire week. And for a lot of people, that's a new experience. But if the therapist is oversharing about their experience, then again, that's a sign too. And finally, going to your point about the different types of therapists, right? So there's different levels, different credentialing levels, and you're right, those life coaches. Some they can do some good. I'm not gonna say they can't do no good, but it's not therapy, right? Um, but there's related to that. There's also different types of therapeutic orientations and tools that people use. And I would encourage folks to do some research about those as well, because different ones are going to work better for different people. And I think that's part of the education that we must do as consumers before actually going in to see someone. But also, you can ask the therapist about their theoretical orientation. If you don't remember anything else from this broadcast, remember theoretical orientation. So you ask the next person to call in for a consultation, what's your theoretical orientation? And they should be able to tell you, because that's going to be important too.
Yeah. And I think I may have chipped out when you guys mentioned this or talked about it, but I think of as consumers, we're also interviewing the therapists. And I think that touches on Brittany's like power dynamic conversation that I may have missed, where we're also interviewing the therapist, and it's important for you to ask questions and not just take their word for everything, right? Because I know when I do my consultation calls, I have my spiel. I know what I'm going to talk to and the points I'm going to touch on, but come with your own questions. And most times I answer a lot of your questions, but come with your own questions, because there are things and you are a consumer, and it's important for you to get your questions answered before you go into a relationship and or a conversation and you are completely vulnerable and exposed.
And the last question, this is a community question, especially now, is what's a good way to talk about, I think, mental health and or therapy with your partner? Yeah, like how do you start that conversation?
Be direct, like you would with all other conversations that you're having with your partner. I would hope, you know. Your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Like when we're talking about relationships and being partners, everybody's like, oh, make sure you got tested and, all this other stuff. Well, can you ask them, are you in therapy also? Like, that's a valid question too. Have you ever been to therapy? Do you have any past traumas that you're trying to work through? Sometimes those things can be discovered during a relationship. Somebody has the time now, we got this period of isolation and I don't have to worry about work and there's no commute. And I'm really starting to think about some things that have kind of been weighing on me, right? Or you could be involved with a partner who has a mental health diagnosis. It's important to ask, like, just like if you know their first name and their last name, let's have a conversation about your mental health. I want to know about your physical health too, but I want to know about your mental health. And if you find the conversation to be a little uneasy or you're not sure how to approach it, then maybe we take out the words mental health and we talk about self-care. And we talk about, the way that we've been feeling or my emotions or, what's been going on with you or things like that. We can bring the conversation up in that way, but we still want to talk about mental health and start to use the language, that I'm worried about your mental health. I'm worried about your mental stability. I've been noticing some inconsistencies with your mood or whatever is going on, but I want to talk to you about what's going on with you. And I also want to talk to you about what's going on with me, because that's important too. Like to care for your partner is one thing, but we also want to make sure that you're caring for yourself. So if you're feeling like I'm having some concerns with depression or I'm having some concerns with anxiety, concentration, or whatever the concern is, make it a safe space for you and your partner. And last thing would be to make sure that you're developing a safe space to speak to your partner. That is very important in relationships, that we should have a safe place to speak about things that are going on, period, with no judgment. Sure. And that's why therapy is so important, because it offers you that therapeutic space. We're just here simply to talk about you and what's going on.
Sure. So, Brittany, you said everything, so thank you. The one thing that I'm going to piggyback on is this idea around safe space. which I think is really important, not only in relationships, but I think therapy does provide a safe space for a lot of people to be their authentic selves. And so I have a client who that's one of his questions he asks before he even meets someone. Like, I'm in therapy. This is what I'm doing. How do you feel about therapy? Right? Because therapy is a really big part of his life. It has been instrumental for his growth. So to be partnered with someone who doesn't agree or see it in the same way can create some friction right off the bat. So really, similar to what you were saying, Brittany, ripping the Band-Aid off very early and having the conversation, being very direct around it, especially if it's something that you value.
Yeah, and I would say when it comes to having those conversations, also being open to, yes, therapy, but again, there are different ways to take care of ourselves besides therapy. So it's more about, like you were talking about, Brittany, mental health. So whether mental health for you and your partner look like therapy, or whether it looks like some sort of mindfulness practice or some sort of Afrocentric ritual or something, whatever it is, there's a priority on emotional expression, emotional awareness, emotional expression, and emotional vulnerability. Those are the sorts of things and skills that's really important to have in a relationship. I would also say to frame it as a we instead of a I or you problem. So if you start talking about mental health as, you have a mental health problem or you're messing with my mental health problem, then we're automatically setting up an adversarial relationship, and that's not really going to be healthy or beneficial for anyone. But framing it as, I'm concerned about us, I want us to grow, and here's some ideas about how we may do that. I think that sort of framing can help too in having those conversations about mental health.
Mhm.
Right, so that was it, I think, for my questions. So I want to thank all of you for tuning in, and I want to thank our guests for participating as well. You've been very helpful in, I think, telling us really how it is as far as like the state of mental health in the Black queer community, and also giving us, I think, very good tidbits on like where to go and like how to excel and how to like take mental health a little more seriously and excel as a community and really think our mental health and our state of being is important to grow and excel as people that contribute well and can contribute more now and even more than that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.